I came to the wedding dressed in my best, clutching pride tighter than my purse. My son looked radiant, hopeful. That was enough for me. Until she opened her mouth. Halfway through the reception, my new daughter-in-law raised her glass and, with a smirk, said, "And a toast to Daniel's mother, the burden we had to invite." Laughter followed. Light, mocking. No one stopped her, not even Daniel. I felt something inside me shift. Not sadness, not anger exactly, just a slow, cold realization. I stood up. "May I?" I asked, my voice calm. The clinking died down. The room turned. They expected me to shrink, to vanish into the white linen and crystal. But I'm not built to vanish. I've raised a son alone, worked double shifts, and buried more loved ones than I care to count. I've survived storms this girl couldn't name. And today I was done being polite. I lifted my glass and smiled. "To family?" I said. "Even the ones who don't yet understand what that word means." Silence. Then a few nods. I didn't sit down right away. I let them look at me, and truly see me for the first time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Margo Lively touched the simple pearl necklace at her throat, Ezra's gift on their 20th anniversary, and studied her reflection in the rearview mirror. The lakeside estate loomed beyond her modest sedan, its white columns and manicured gardens gleaming in the late summer sun. Music drifted across the water, strings and laughter mingling with the breeze. She'd arrived precisely on time. Neither early enough to appear desperate nor late enough to draw attention. The modestly priced blue dress she'd chosen had seemed dignified in her small bedroom mirror that morning. Now, watching women in designer silk glide across the lawn, she recognized her error. Not in taste, but in context. Like bringing a library book to a rare manuscript auction. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "It's just one day." But it wasn't just one day. It was the culmination of years watching her only son, the boy she'd raised alone after Ezra's heart gave out when Nathan was just 12, drift into a world that no longer had room for a retired librarian with sensible shoes and a voice that couldn't compete with the confident declarations of his new circle. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago, cream-colored cardstock with precise gold lettering. "Nathan Ezra Lively and Sloane Victoria Whitaker request the honor of your presence." No mother of the groom designation. Just her name, spelled correctly at least on the envelope. When she'd finally called Nathan, his response had been oddly stilted. "Sloane's mother handled the invitations. I'm sure she meant nothing by it. You know how these things are." But Margo didn't know. That was the point. She stepped from the car, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. A valet appeared, looking momentarily confused by her modest vehicle among the gleaming luxury cars. "Good afternoon," Margo said, forcing warmth into her voice. "I'm Nathan's mother." Recognition flickered in his eyes. Pity, perhaps? Or was she simply becoming paranoid? He took her keys with a practiced smile and handed her a claim ticket. Crossing the lawn toward the ceremony area, Margo caught sight of Nathan standing with a group of groomsmen. His suit was impeccably tailored, his posture straighter than she remembered. When had her boy, who once spent hours with his head, on her lap as she read him stories, become this polished stranger? He glanced her way, nodded briefly, then returned to his conversation. "Margo Lively?" A young woman with a clipboard approached. "We have your seat marked. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. She followed, keenly aware that other mothers were in the bridal party's preparation area. Other mothers had been included in the rehearsal dinner. Other mothers knew the plan for the day. The woman seated her in the 5th row on the groom's side, not first, where a mother might traditionally sit. 5th, behind distant cousins and Nathan's college friends. Is this correct? Margo asked softly. The woman checked her clipboard. Yes, ma'am. Per the seating chart. She hesitated. Would you like water before the ceremony begins? No, thank you. Margo sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap. 25 years ago, she'd held Nathan's small hand as they spread Ezra's ashes over this same lake. Her 4-year-old had asked if fish would eat his daddy. She'd answered his questions honestly, as she always had. Later, she worked double shifts to afford his college applications. She'd proofread his essays late into the night. She'd celebrated every milestone with handmade cards and carefully chosen gifts that fit her budget. Now she was a fifth-row guest. The ceremony proceeded with choreographed precision. Sloane was undeniably beautiful in her couture gown, dark hair swept into an elegant updo, her smile dazzling as she processed down the aisle on her father's arm. Nathan looked at his bride with naked adoration, the kind of look that reminded Margo of Ezra. A tall, imperious woman Margo recognized from photos as Ellie Whitaker, Sloane's mother, caught her eye briefly during the vows. Her gaze was assessing, dismissive, categorizing. Margo lifted her chin slightly, refusing to shrink. As the newlyweds recessed down the aisle, Nathan's eyes met hers briefly. Was that guilt in his expression? He quickly looked away, Sloane's hand possessively on his arm. The reception was held in a grand tent overlooking the lake. Crystal chandeliers hung from the peaked ceiling, tables adorned with arrangements of white roses and greenery. Margo found her place card at a table near the back, with distant family members she barely recognized. Margo, is that you? She turned to find Grace, Ezra's sister, approaching. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Grace had suggested, 2 years after Ezra's death, that perhaps Margo should consider dating again. Hello, Grace. Margo accepted her sister-in-law's brief hug. You look well. As do you. Grace glanced around. This is quite something, isn't it? Yes. Margo couldn't manage more. I tried calling Nathan about the seating arrangements, Grace said quietly. This isn't right, you know. You should be at the family table. Margo shook her head. It's fine. It's their day. Before Grace could respond, a tinkling of crystal silenced the room. Sloane stood at the center table, radiant in the soft lighting, a champagne flute in her hand. Nathan beside her. Before the formal toasts, Sloane's voice carried across the tent. I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who made this day possible. She proceeded to acknowledge her parents, the wedding planner, her bridesmaids, each sentence perfectly calibrated for maximum charm. The crowd responded with appreciative murmurs and warm laughter. And of course, Sloane continued, her eyes finding Margo in the crowd, we should acknowledge Nathan's mother, Margo. A spotlight somehow found her. Margo felt heat rise to her cheeks. The burden we had to invite, Sloane added with a silvery laugh that couldn't quite disguise the cruelty beneath. A collective intake of breath rippled through the guests. Sloane continued speaking, something about family being complicated, but Margo couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. She saw Nathan's startled expression, his half-step toward his bride, then his retreat. His silence. The worst part wasn't the insult. It was her son's failure to defend her. In that moment, a memory surfaced. Nathan at 10 years old, defending a smaller boy from bullies on the playground. Mom, he'd said later, you always told me to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Where was that boy now? Margo placed her napkin carefully on the table and stood. Without hurry, without drawing attention, she walked steadily toward the exit. No scene, no tears, just quiet dignity. Outside, evening mist was rolling in from the lake. She followed a stone path that led to the water's edge, the sounds of the reception fading behind her. The air was cool against her flushed skin. At the shoreline, Margo stared out at the darkening water. 25 years ago, she and Nathan had stood here, saying goodbye to Ezra. Her son's small hand in hers, both of them facing an uncertain future together. "Mom?" She turned to find Nathan approaching, his expression troubled. "Are you okay? I'm so sorry about what Sloane said. She didn't mean it that way. She was just nervous and—" "Stop." Margot's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't make excuses for cruelty, Nathan. Your father never would have." He flinched as if she'd slapped him. "I'm leaving now," she continued. "Please enjoy your wedding." "Mom, please. I raised you to be better than this." Her voice didn't waver. "To be brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." She walked past him, back straight, eyes dry. The mist enveloped her, silver gray and cool against her skin. For the first time in years, Margo felt something stir within her. Not just hurt, not just disappointment, but resolve. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Morning mist clung to the surface of the lake as Margo pulled into the estate's circular driveway. Her night had been sleepless, replaying Sloane's words, Nathan's silence, and her own quiet exit. But with dawn had come clarity and purpose. She straightened the collar of her linen blouse and checked her reflection. No trace of last night's humiliation remained visible, though it still burned beneath her skin. Today, she wore the armor of normalcy. Casual clothes, hair neatly combed, expression placid. The security guard at the gate had waved her through without question when she'd explained she'd forgotten something at the reception. The grand house looked different in the morning light. Less intimidating, more fallible. Signs of the previous night's revelry were evident: champagne flutes waiting to be collected, wilting floral arrangements, a lone high heel abandoned near a hedge. The perfect facade had slipped, if only slightly. A young man with a camera slung around his neck emerged from a side door, his focus on the viewfinder as he captured the mist rising off the lake. His dark curls fell over his forehead as he adjusted his lens. "Good morning," Margo called softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, surprised but not alarmed. "Morning. You're early for cleanup." "I'm not staff," she said with a small smile. "I'm Nathan's mother." Recognition flickered in his eyes. Not pity this time, but something more complex. Interest, perhaps. "Julian Price," he offered, extending his hand. "Wedding photographer. I remember you from yesterday." His grip was firm, his gaze direct. No awkward shuffling or looking past. Her shoulder. "Were you looking for Nathan? The wedding party is still recovering." His tone suggested the hangover was substantial. "Actually, I left something behind last night. A watch. Sentimental value." The lie came easily to her lips. "You wouldn't happen to know if anyone's found it?" Julian shook his head. "I haven't heard, but I've been out here since sunrise. The light on the lake is incredible." He gestured toward the water. "The bridal party should be emerging for brunch soon, if you want to ask around." "I'll do that." Margo glanced at his camera. "Were you able to capture good moments yesterday?" His smile widened, genuine enthusiasm replacing professional courtesy. "Some of my best work, actually. The setting was perfect, and there were so many authentic moments." Something in his emphasis caught her attention. "Would you mind showing me a few?" "I had to leave early," she said, the understatement hanging between them. Julian hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Sure. I've got some rough edits on my laptop in the pool house. I'm using it as a temporary studio." They walked across the manicured lawn, morning dew dampening the hem of Margot's slacks. The pool house was a miniature version of the main residence, all glass and white columns, ridiculously grand for what amounted to a changing room. Inside, Julian's equipment was neatly arranged on a glass table. His laptop displayed a grid of thumbnails, hundreds of wedding photos yet to be sorted and edited. "These won't be the final versions," he cautioned, clicking through to show her a series of ceremony shots. Margo nodded appropriately at the professional portraits. Nathan and Sloane exchanging vows, the first kiss, the wedding party posed on, the lawn. Beautiful, sanitized moments that would grace the wedding album and social media accounts. "Those are lovely," she said politely. Julian's eyes flickered to her face, assessing. Then, without comment, he switched to another folder labeled Candids, not for final selection. "I always keep the outtakes," he explained. "Sometimes they capture something more. Real." The first image showed Sloane's mother, Ellie, gripping her daughter's wrist tightly during what appeared to be a private moment before the ceremony. Sloane's expression was not that of a blissful bride, but of a woman receiving instructions. "Strong personalities in this family," Julian commented neutrally. He continued scrolling, Nathan checking his phone anxiously during cocktail hour. Sloane's fixed smile when speaking to an elderly guest, and then a shot that made Margo inhale sharply. Sloane looking directly at someone off camera, her beautiful features transformed into something venomous, calculating. Gone was the polished socialite. In her place, a predator. "When was this taken?" Margo asked quietly. "Just before the reception entrance. I'm not sure what triggered it." Julian's voice was careful, professional, but his eyes were knowing. "Camera catches things people don't always want seen." Margo nodded slowly. "Yes, it does." Julian continued through his catalog, but Margo's mind was elsewhere. She'd come this morning on impulse, driven by some need to reclaim space that had been denied her. Now, she sensed there was more to discover. "I should probably look for that watch," she said finally, closing the casual viewing session before suspicion could arise. Julian closed his laptop with a nod. "Of course, I'll be sorting through these all day if you want to see more later." As they stepped back outside, voices drifted from the main house. Margo recognized Sloane's musical laugh, perfectly calibrated for public consumption, and, beneath it, the deeper cadence of Ellie Whittaker's authoritative tone. "The brunch has begun," Julian observed. "Perfect timing." Margo reached into her purse and withdrew Ezra's old wristwatch, the one she'd claimed to be searching for. She slipped it onto her wrist, the worn leather band a comforting weight. Ezra had worn it daily until his heart failed. Now it served as her talisman, a reminder of the man who had never let anyone diminish him, or her. "Found it," she said, simply holding up her wrist. "It was with me all along." Julian's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing. They parted at the pool house door, Julian returning to his work, while Margo made her way toward the main house. As she approached the terrace where mimosas were being served to groggy wedding guests, she noticed a side door ajar, likely a service entrance. Without conscious decision, she slipped through it into a quiet hallway. Voices echoed from around the corner, tense despite their hushed volume. Margo paused, instinct keeping her still. "This is not the time to lose your nerve, Sloane." Ellie's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Nathan's financial exposure is precisely why this marriage is essential. The merger cannot move forward without it." "I'm well aware of what's at stake, Mother." Sloane's reply was equally cold, stripped of its public charm. "But his attachment to her complicates things. You saw how he reacted when I put her in her place." A momentary weakness. Men are sentimental about their mothers. It passes. And if it doesn't? If she becomes problematic? A pause, pregnant with unspoken implications. Then we handle it, as we've handled everything else. The Whittaker way. Footsteps approached from the hallway behind Margo. She quickly moved to the nearest door, finding herself in what appeared to be a small study. She busied herself examining a bookshelf as a caterer passed by with a tray of pastries. When the coast was clear, Margo slipped back into the hallway, her mind processing what she'd overheard. Financial exposure, merger, the Whitaker way. Each phrase a puzzle piece, incomplete but suggestive. She made her way to the terrace where the wedding party was gathering. Nathan sat at a table with Sloane's father, their heads bent in conversation. That ceased abruptly when they noticed her approach. "Mom." Nathan stood, surprise and something like guilt clouding his features. "I didn't expect you back today." "I forgot something last night," she said, touching Ezra's watch. "I couldn't leave it behind." Sloane appeared at Nathan's elbow, her smile brittle. "Margo, how dedicated of you to drive all the way back. Some things are irreplaceable." Margo's voice was mild, but she held Sloane's gaze a beat longer than was comfortable. Ellie Whitaker approached, champagne flute in hand, observing the tableau with calculating eyes. "Mrs. Lively, will you be joining us for brunch?" The question was polite, the dismissal unmistakable. "No, thank you," Margo replied with equal politeness. "I've found what I came for." She kissed Nathan's cheek, feeling him stiffen slightly at this public display of maternal affection. "Congratulations again, sweetheart. I'll call you next week." As she walked back to her car, Margo felt Ellie's gaze on her back, assessing, measuring. Let her look, Margo thought. Let her believe she was watching a defeated woman retreat. But what Margo carried away from the lakeside estate was far more valuable than Ezra's watch. She had glimpsed beneath the perfect surface of the Whitaker world and seen something troubling in its depths. The wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a business transaction. And Nathan, her son, her only child, was somehow both asset and pawn. Margo started her car, the quiet rumble of its modest engine a contrast to the gleaming luxury vehicles surrounding it. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror at the grand estate shrinking behind her. The facade was polished, but she had seen the cracks, and through those cracks, something ugly peered out. 3 days after the wedding, Margo found herself parked outside Julian Price's downtown studio. The converted brick warehouse stood in stark contrast to the lakeside estate, authentic rather than imposing, its character earned rather than manufactured. She hesitated before turning off the ignition. What was she doing here? Was she merely feeding her hurt, looking for evidence to justify her growing suspicion? Or was this something more? A need to protect Nathan from whatever the Whitaker way entailed? Ezra's watch ticked softly on her wrist. She'd taken to wearing it daily since retrieving it from her purse at the estate. Its steady rhythm reminded her of simpler times, when her small family had been whole. "What would you do, Ezra?" she whispered, running her thumb across the watch face. No answer came, of course, but the familiar gesture steadied her. Julian answered her knock immediately, as if he'd been waiting. His studio was a study in organized chaos. Cameras and lenses meticulously arranged on shelves, while prints in various stages of development hung from wires strung across the high ceiling. "Mrs. Lively." His smile was genuine. "I wondered if I might see you again." "Margo, please," she corrected gently. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all. I'm sorting through the wedding photos for preliminary approval. The Whitakers are exacting clients." He gestured toward a small sitting area near the window, 2 leather armchairs flanking a weathered coffee table. A pot of tea steamed gently beside a laptop open to a grid of wedding images. "I brought coffee," Margo said, offering the paper bag from the cafe across the street. "And I have a request, if you're available for hire." Julian accepted the bag with a raised eyebrow. "Depends on the request." "I'd like a portrait," she said carefully. "A recreation, actually. I have an old photograph of my late husband, but it's deteriorating. I thought perhaps you could help me preserve it properly." She opened her purse and removed a dog-eared photograph of Ezra, young, handsome, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at the photographer, at her. It had been taken on their first anniversary, before Nathan was born. Julian studied the image with professional appreciation. Beautiful composition, the light in his eyes. He glanced up at Margo. "You took this?" She nodded. "Photography was a hobby once, before life got busy. You have an eye." He carefully placed the photograph on the table. "I can definitely help with this. Digital restoration? Archival printing?" "Thank you." Margo settled into one of the armchairs, her gaze drifting to the laptop screen. "How are the wedding edits coming along?" Julian's mouth quirked. "Diplomatically? Challenging. The Whitakers have specific expectations about how things should appear, as opposed to how they are." Their eyes met, a moment of understanding, passing between them. "You noticed that too," he said finally, not a question but a confirmation. Margo nodded slightly. "I've been noticing quite a lot lately." Julian studied her for a long moment before turning the laptop toward her. "I have a sequence I thought you might find interesting. I was shooting in burst mode during the toasts." He clicked through to a folder and began a slideshow. The images captured Sloane at the head table, Nathan beside her, champagne glasses raised. The first few showed their practiced smiles, the perfect veneer of newlywed bliss. But then, "There," Margo said softly. The sequence showed Sloane leaning toward Nathan, whispering something in his ear. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm, then smoothed into careful neutrality. In the next frame, Sloane's hand moved over his champagne flute, while her other hand gestured animatedly, drawing attention elsewhere. Something small dropped from her fingers into his drink. "Did you see what that was?" Margo asked, keeping her voice steady despite the alarm rising within her. Julian shook his head. "Too small to make out. Could be nothing. A mint, perhaps. Or something else." Margo finished the thought. He nodded slowly. "I noticed Nathan seemed different after the toasts, more compliant. I assumed it was the champagne." Margo remembered her son's glassy-eyed smile during the first dance, how his movements had seemed slightly disconnected, his responses delayed. At the time, she'd attributed it to the emotional weight of the day. Now, she wasn't so certain. "There's more," Julian said, navigating to another folder. "I caught this during the father-daughter dance." The images showed Ellie Whitaker near the tent entrance, engaged in intense conversation with a man Margo didn't recognize. Tall, gray-suited, with the anonymous handsomeness of wealth and power. Their body language suggested urgency, not celebration. "Who is he?" she asked. "Not a wedding guest as far as I could tell. He never signed the guest book or participated in any activities. Arrived during the dance, spoke only to Ellie, left immediately after." Julian advanced to the final image. In the sequence, the man was walking away, but had turned back to give Ellie one last emphatic instruction. Though his face was partially obscured, there was something familiar about his profile that nagged at Margo's memory. "Can you enlarge that section?" She asked, pointing to the man's hand. "Is he holding something?" Julian zoomed in, enhancing the image. "Looks like business cards. Or stock certificates," Margo said suddenly, remembering how Ezra had once explained the distinctive blue-bordered papers to Nathan. "My husband worked in finance briefly before becoming a teacher. I recognize the format." Julian's eyebrows rose. "Corporate business at a wedding? That's dedicated. Or desperate." Margo sat back, processing the implications. Financial exposure, merger, stock certificates, pieces fitting together, forming a troubling pattern. Her phone chimed, startling them both. The caller ID displayed Grace's name, Ezra's sister, whom she hadn't properly spoken to in years. "Excuse me," she said, stepping away to answer. "Grace?" "Margo." Her sister-in-law's voice sounded tentative. "I've been thinking about the wedding, about how they treated you. It wasn't right." Margo remained silent, waiting. "I was wondering if you might come for tea tomorrow," Grace continued. "There are things about the Whitakers that perhaps you should know. Things Ezra knew." The mention of her late husband in connection with the Whitakers sent a jolt through Margo. "What things, Grace?" "Not over the phone," came the hushed reply. "Please, just come. 3 o'clock?" "I'll be there," Margo promised, ending the call with a growing sense of unease. She turned back to find Julian studying Ezra's photograph again, his expression thoughtful. "He looks like a good man," Julian said quietly. "He was." Margo reclaimed her seat, the weight of memory and newfound purpose settling around her shoulders. "The best I've ever known. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were standard, but his tone held genuine empathy. "Thank you." She glanced at the laptop screen, still displaying the mysterious man with stock certificates. "Sometimes I feel him most strongly when I'm trying to solve a puzzle." Ezra loved puzzles. Julian nodded, understanding. "And this wedding is quite the puzzle, isn't it?" "Yes." Margo tapped Ezra's watch gently. "My sister-in-law just invited me for tea tomorrow. She says she has information about the Whitakers, things Ezra knew." "That sounds promising," Julian said, closing the laptop. "And potentially complicated." "Life usually is." Margo managed a small smile. "Julian, would it be possible for me to see more of these candid photos? The ones that won't make it into the official album?" He considered her request, then nodded slowly. "I could prepare a private gallery for the mother of the groom." His emphasis suggested he understood her true motivation. "There's something off about this whole situation. I've photographed hundreds of weddings. This one felt choreographed, like a business merger with flowers." "That's exactly what it felt like," Margo agreed softly. As she stood to leave, Julian handed her back Ezra's photograph. "I'll start on the restoration tomorrow, and I'll send you access to those candids tonight." "Thank you." She hesitated at the door. "Julian, why are you helping me? You don't know me." He considered her question seriously. "I believe in what my camera captures, the truth between the posed moments, and whatever's happening with the Whitakers and your son." He shook his head. "It doesn't look right through my lens." Driving home, Margo felt Ezra's presence more strongly than she had in years. Not just grief now, but something else. A sense of continuity, of picking up a thread he had held before her. Whatever Grace knew about the Whitakers, whatever Ezra had discovered years ago, it was connected to what was happening now. To Nathan. To this marriage that felt more like acquisition than love. Margo glanced at her phone as an email notification appeared. Julian had already sent the private gallery link. Tonight, she would study those images like the librarian she'd been for 30 years, cataloging every detail, every inconsistency. Tomorrow, she would meet with Grace and begin assembling the scattered pieces of truth. For the first time since Sloane's cruel words at the reception, Margo felt something beyond hurt, a quiet gathering strength. A determination to understand what was happening to her son, and if necessary, to rescue him from it. Just as Ezra would have done. Grace's Victorian home stood on a quiet street lined with ancient oak trees, their leaves beginning to turn with the first hint of autumn. Margo paused at the wrought iron gate, memories washing over her. Sunday dinners years ago. Nathan playing with his cousins on the sprawling lawn. Ezra and Grace deep in conversation on the wide front porch, their similar profiles marking them unmistakably as siblings. Before Ezra died. before the silences grew between them. Margo had spent the previous evening studying Julian's private gallery of candid wedding photos. Each image had confirmed her growing suspicions, Nathan's increasingly unfocused gaze as the reception progressed. Sloane's whispered conversations with various guests, her smiles calibrated to each interaction. Ellie Whitaker watching everything with calculated precision. Now, standing at Grace's gate, Margo felt the weight of those images pressing against her chest. Whatever Grace knew about the Whitakers, whatever connection Ezra had to them, it was the missing piece she needed. The doorbell chimed softly inside the house. Footsteps approached, hesitated, then the heavy oak door swung open. Margo. Grace stood in the doorway, grayer than Margo remembered, the resemblance to Ezra more pronounced with age. Thank you for coming. The greeting was stiff, laden with unspoken history. They had once been close, not just sisters-in-law, but friends. Until Grace had suggested 2 years after Ezra's death that perhaps Margo should consider dating again. Ezra wouldn't want you to be alone, she'd said. The words had felt like betrayal then, a dismissal of Margo's grief, a pressure to move, on when she could barely breathe. Now, standing in Grace's foyer with its familiar scent of lemon polish and old books, Margo wondered if she had overreacted. If the years of distance had been worth the principle. Tea is ready in the solarium, Grace said, leading the way through the house. I made those almond cookies you used to like. The solarium was exactly as Margo remembered, wicker furniture with faded blue cushions, potted ferns hanging from the ceiling, sunlight streaming through leaded glass windows. A silver tea service waited on the small table between 2 chairs. This is lovely, Margo said, taking her seat. Thank you for inviting me, Grace. Grace poured tea with practiced movements, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. I should have reached out long before now, after seeing how they treated you at the wedding. She shook her head. It wasn't right, and it brought back memories. What memories? Margo asked quietly, accepting the delicate teacup. Grace sipped her tea before answering. Has Nathan ever told you how he got his internship at Whitaker Financial? The one that started his career? Margo frowned. He said it was through a college connection, a professor's recommendation. That's what he believes. Grace set down her cup with a soft clink. The truth is more complicated. She rose and crossed to an antique secretary desk, unlocking a small drawer. From it, she withdrew a faded newspaper clipping. Do you remember this? Margo studied the yellowed paper. It was a small article from nearly 20 years ago when Nathan was still in middle school. The headline read, Local Teacher Questions Ethics of Development Deal. Ezra, Margo whispered, recognizing her husband's serious expression in the doll, accompanying photograph. I remember he was upset about something at school. A proposal to sell part of the athletic fields for commercial development. It wasn't just any development, Grace said. It was a Whitaker Properties project, one of their first major expansions into our county. Ellie Whitaker was on the school board then. Margo's mind raced, connections forming. Ezra opposed it publicly, said it wasn't in the students' best interests. He did more than that. Grace's voice dropped. He found evidence that Ellie had pushed the deal through using her position, despite knowing the land was potentially contaminated from the old factory that once stood there. Children could have been exposed to toxins if the construction disturbed the soil. Margo stared at her, stunned. I never knew that part. Ezra wanted to protect you and Nathan, Grace said gently. He took his findings to a journalist friend. They were preparing an exposé that would have implicated not just Ellie, but her husband Richard in a cover-up. What happened? Margo asked, though she already knew the answer. The development had been built. A gleaming shopping center now stood where students once played soccer. They pressured him to back down. Grace's voice hardened. First, with money, a consulting fee to keep quiet. When he refused, there were threats, veiled at first, then more direct. What kinds of threats? The kind that mentioned Nathan's future, his college prospects. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she refilled their teacups. The last one suggested that accidents could happen to 12-year-old boys walking home from school. Margo felt sick. Ezra never told me. He was protecting you both. After that final threat, he stopped fighting. The development proceeded. Ezra was different afterward. Quieter. This was right before his heart attack, Margo realized, pieces clicking into terrible place. Grace nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. The stress, the anger at being silenced, feeling powerless to protect what mattered. I always believed it contributed. Silence fell between them, heavy with shared grief and revelation. 3 months after Ezra died, Grace finally continued, Nathan received a letter offering him a future internship at Whitaker Financial, contingent on his college performance. A tribute to his father's community service, it said. Margo closed her eyes, understanding washing over her. They bought his loyalty with his future, and made sure he never knew the truth about his father's opposition to them, Grace confirmed. By the time the internship actually happened, years had passed. Nathan had no reason to connect it to Ezra's old battle. And I never told him, Margo said softly. I thought Ezra was just fighting another bureaucratic battle at school. I had no idea the Whitakers were involved. Grace rose again, this time moving to a small side table where a leather-bound book lay waiting. After you called yesterday, I went through Ezra's things, the ones he left here when you two were having that rough patch, right before he died. Margo remembered. A brief separation, just 2 weeks, while they worked through a difficult period in their marriage. Ezra had stayed with Grace, then returned home determined to make things right between them. They'd had 4 more months together before his heart failed. I found this, Grace said, offering the book. His journal from that time. I think he was keeping records, Margo. Things he discovered about the Whitakers that frightened him. Margo accepted the journal, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Ezra's initials were embossed in the corner, the pages within filled with his distinctive slanted handwriting. Have you read it? She asked. Grace shook her head. Only enough to know what it was. It didn't feel right to go further. It was meant for you, I think. Why didn't you give it to me before now? Grace's expression crumpled slightly. At first, grief, then distance grew between us. Years passed, and it seemed too late. She reached across the table to grasp Margo's hand. I'm sorry, Margo. I failed both you and Ezra by keeping silent. Margo squeezed her hand in return. We both kept silent too long. The Whitakers are dangerous, Grace warned. Whatever Ezra found, whatever you're discovering now, be careful. They've built their empire on silencing people. I need to understand what's happening to Nathan, Margo said firmly. This marriage, the way Sloane behaves with him. Something isn't right. Grace nodded slowly. I saw it too at the wedding. The way she managed him, like an asset rather than a husband. Margo thought of the photographs Julian had shown her. Sloane slipping something into Nathan's drink, his increasingly vacant expression afterward. Will you help me, Grace? She asked quietly. Help me understand what Ezra found? Yes. The word was simple but carried the weight of a vow. It's time to break the silence, for Ezra's sake, for Nathan's. As the afternoon light lengthened across the solarium floor, the two women began to rebuild the bridge between them. Grace shared what she remembered of Ezra's concerns. Margo described the troubling patterns she'd observed at the wedding. When it was time to leave, Margo held Ezra's journal against her heart, both dreading and needing what she might find within its pages. At the door, Grace embraced her tightly. Be careful, Margo. The Whitakers don't just destroy careers or reputations. There were rumors. accidents that happen to people who cross them. "I'll be careful," Margo promised, "but I won't be silent. Not anymore." As she drove home, the journal on the passenger seat beside her, Margo felt Ezra's presence more strongly than she had in years. Not just grief now, but purpose. A continuation of what he had begun and been forced to abandon. The quiet librarian who had been dismissed as the burden they had to invite now carried something far weightier. The truth her husband had tried to expose, the legacy he had left unfinished. Tonight, she would read his words. Tomorrow, she would begin to act on them. For Nathan, for Ezra, for herself. Margo sat at her kitchen table, a single lamp casting a golden circle around Ezra's journal. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, providing a soft backdrop to the silence of her modest home. She had been staring at the journal for almost an hour, both eager and afraid to open it, to hear Ezra's voice again after all these years, even in written form. Finally, she ran her fingers over the worn leather cover and opened to the first page. March 15th, 2004. Met with Carl at the diner today. He's confirming what I suspected about the Whitaker Foundation's community grants. The money isn't going where they claim. The daycare center never received the $100K announced in the TR press. Neither did the youth literacy program. Paper trails lead to shell companies, then disappear offshore. Carl says the foundation is just a tax shelter, but I think it's worse. These aren't just accounting tricks. There's something methodical about how they're establishing relationships with key people in the county, building dependencies, creating leverage. If I'm right, the school development deal was just the beginning. Margo turned the page, Ezra's meticulous handwriting carrying her back 20 years. Entry after entry detailed his growing concerns. Financial records that didn't add up. Public officials who suddenly dropped their opposition to Whitaker projects. After private meetings, environmental reports that disappeared from public records. She found the entry from just after their brief separation. April 10th, 2004. Back home with Margo and Nathan, where I belong. 2 weeks away made everything clearer. I can't keep this investigation from them any longer. The weight of secrecy is destroying our marriage. Margo deserves to know why I've been so distant, so preoccupied. Tomorrow, I'll show her everything I've found. Together, we'll decide how to protect Nathan from what's coming. The Whitakers won't stop with that school property. They're expanding into healthcare now. The new surgery center is just a front for something bigger. Carl found links to pharmaceutical testing that wouldn't pass regulatory scrutiny. Richard Whitaker cornered me at the grocery store today. Smiling, hand on my shoulder, asking about Nathan's college plans. The threat was clear beneath his congratulations on Nathan's academic achievements. Boys with his potential deserve every opportunity, he said. It would be a shame to see that potential wasted. But tomorrow never came. The next day's entry was missing. The day after that, scrawled in shaky handwriting, April 12th, 2004. Chest pain again. Worse this time. Doc says stress, but increased medication. Must finish assembling the files. If anything happens, everything goes to Carl James at the Tribune. Told him this afternoon. He'll know what to do. The final entry was dated April 20th, 2004, 4 days before Ezra died. Nathan came home excited about a special summer program for high school students interested in finance. Invitation only, he said, sponsored by Whitaker Financial. They're already making their move on him, laying groundwork for the future. How do I warn him without revealing what I know about the threats? He's just a boy. He shouldn't have to carry this burden. Perhaps I don't need to expose everything publicly. If I bring just the foundation irregularities to light, it might be enough to create distance between Nathan and their influence. I'll meet with Richard Whitaker tomorrow. One last chance for him to back off voluntarily before I take what I know to the authorities. Margo closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Ezra had died before that meeting could take place. A heart attack while grading papers at his desk. She had found him there, head bent over a student's essay as if he'd simply fallen, asleep. Had the Whitakers known what he was planning? Had they... A knock at the door startled her from these dark thoughts. Margo hastily wiped her eyes and slipped the journal into a drawer before answering. A young woman stood on her porch, rain dripping from her stylish coat. Her face was vaguely familiar, one of Sloane's bridesmaids. "Mrs. Lively?" The woman's voice was hesitant. "I'm Layla Carr. I was in Sloane's wedding. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but I saw you leaving Julian's studio yesterday and I think we should talk." Margo studied her carefully. Layla was younger than Nathan, perhaps mid-20s, with bright eyes and a nervous energy that suggested she was operating on limited sleep and considerable anxiety. "Come in out of the rain," Margo said finally, stepping aside. Layla entered, shedding her wet coat. "Thank you. I've been driving around for hours trying to work up the courage to come here." "Would you like some tea?" Margo asked, leading her to the kitchen. "Or something stronger?" "Tea is fine." Layla perched on the edge of a chair, her eyes darting around the modest kitchen. "Your home is lovely, so real." Margo busied herself with the kettle. "Why are you here, Layla?" The young woman's shoulders slumped slightly. "Because I can't keep pretending. The wedding was... I knew it. Was wrong, but I went along with it anyway." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I was Sloane's roommate at Radcliffe. Her best friend, or so I thought." "Until?" Margo prompted, setting a mug of tea before her unexpected guest. "Until I realized I was just another piece on her chessboard." Layla cupped the mug between her palms. "Sloane collects people. Mrs. Lively. She identifies what makes them useful, their connections, their skills, their vulnerabilities, and cultivates relationships accordingly." "And how were you useful?" "My family has political connections. My father works for a senator." She shrugged. "Plus, I was naive enough to believe we were genuinely friends." I think she enjoyed that. Someone who never questioned her motives. "Until you did," Margo observed. Layla nodded. "Junior year. There was a student, Michael Garcia. Brilliant economist, first in his family to attend college. Sloane dated him briefly, then orchestrated his academic downfall when he refused to share his research on emerging market vulnerabilities." "Orchestrated? How?" "She planted plagiarized material in his thesis draft, then anonymously reported him to the ethics committee." Layla's voice dropped. "I helped her. I didn't know what she was planning, but preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. I was the one who delivered the envelope with the forgotten notes to his room. When he was expelled, I realized what I'd been part of. Margo sipped her tea, processing this information. "And you stayed friends with her anyway." "I was a coward," Layla admitted. "By then, I was too implicated to speak out. And Sloane made it clear that crossing her would have consequences." "So why now? Why come to me?" Layla met her eyes directly for the first time. "Because I saw how she treated you at the wedding. That casual cruelty, it's her signature, and your son." She hesitated. "Nathan seems like a good person caught in her web." "He is," Margo said softly. "There's more." Layla took a deep breath. "That foundation Sloane's always talking about? The Whitaker Family Foundation? It's not what it appears. The charitable donations are real, but they're a fraction of what they claim publicly. The rest moves through a network of shell companies. I accidentally saw documents in Ellie's study during wedding preparations." Margo felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of documents?" "Transfer records, board meeting minutes, names of shell companies, Oceanic Partners, Meridian Holdings." Layla's eyes widened slightly. You're not surprised. You already knew. I suspected, Margo said carefully. My husband was investigating the Whitaker Foundation years ago. Then you know they've been operating this way for decades. Layla leaned forward. Mrs. Lively, I think Nathan is being used as a financial shield. His wealth management reputation, his clean record, they're valuable assets to a family with questionable dealings. Margo thought of Julian's photographs, of Sloane slipping something into Nathan's drink, of her son's increasingly vacant expression as the reception progressed. Has Sloane ever mentioned medications to you? She asked. Anything she might take herself or give to others. Layla's expression shifted. She had these pills in college, called them her compliance cocktail. Said they made difficult conversations easier. She shuddered slightly. I saw her use them on her father once, before he was scheduled to testify in a deposition. Said it would take the edge off his temper. And you think she's using them on Nathan? It wasn't a question, but Layla nodded anyway. The way he changed during the reception, I've seen it before. That's why I finally had to come forward. Silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle drumming of rain against the windows. Why should I trust you? Margo finally asked. You've admitted to helping Sloane destroy someone's academic career. You maintained a friendship with her despite knowing what she's capable of. You shouldn't trust me, Layla said simply. Not fully. I'm compromised, and I'm terrified of what the Whitakers might do if they discover I'm talking to you. But you deserve allies in this fight, Mrs. Lively, and I need to start making amends somehow. Margo studied the young woman before her. Guilt and fear radiated from her in equal measure, but there was something else too. Determination, perhaps. The first stirrings of courage. You mentioned Julian's studio, Margo said. Have you spoken with him? Layla shook her head. Not directly, but I noticed he was capturing things during the wedding that weren't picture perfect, things the Whitakers wouldn't want documented. He has photographs, Margo confirmed. Evidence of Sloane's behavior at the reception. That's a start, but it won't be enough. Layla's expression was grave. The Whitakers have weathered worse scandals. They'll claim the photos are misleading, that Sloane was adjusting Nathan's drink or some other explanation. You need more. Such as financial records, proof of their foundation's real activities. Layla hesitated. I might be able to help with that. I still have access to Sloane's cloud storage. We shared accounts for trip planning, and she never removed me. Margo felt Ezra's presence again, almost as if he were sitting beside her. What would he think of this potential alliance? This young woman seeking redemption through belated honesty? She rose and retrieved the journal from the drawer. Before we go further, I need you to understand what you're involving yourself in. The Whitakers aren't just socially ruthless. They've threatened people who stood against them. My husband may have paid the ultimate price for his investigation. Layla paled, but didn't look away. All the more reason they need to be exposed. Confusion clouded his features. What does Dad have to do with the Whitakers? Before Margo could answer, the boathouse door burst open. Ellie Whitaker stood in the entrance, her composure finally, visibly cracked. This is a private family event, she said coldly. I believe it's time for you to leave, Mrs. Lively. I'm speaking with my son, Margo replied, not moving. Nathan is part of our family now, Ellie countered. And you are causing a scene. Am I? Margo's voice remained steady. Or are you afraid of what I might tell him about your foundation, about his father's investigation all those years ago? Something dangerous flashed in Ellie's eyes. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I suggest you stop before you embarrass yourself further. She turned to Nathan. Your wife is looking for you. The donors are waiting. Nathan looked between the two women, visibly torn. The moment hung in the balance, his loyalty tested, his foundation shaken. Nathan, Margo said quietly. We need to talk. Properly. About everything. Will you meet me tomorrow? His expression shifted from confusion to resolution. Yes, he said finally, his voice finding strength. Tomorrow morning, my office. Ellie's face hardened. Nathan, it's just a conversation, Ellie, he said, a new edge in his tone. Surely that's reasonable. He turned and walked past his mother-in-law, back straight, heading toward the tents and his waiting obligations. But something had changed in his demeanor. A seed of defiance had taken root. Margo followed, pausing beside Ellie in the doorway. You can dismiss me, she said softly. You can try to control Nathan, but the truth doesn't disappear because you refuse to acknowledge it. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Ellie hissed, her polished veneer completely gone. The stakes of this marriage go far beyond your petty maternal feelings. I know exactly what I'm interfering with, Margo replied, and I'm just getting started. She walked away, feeling Ellie's glare burning into her back. Across the lawn, she caught Julian's eye as he packed up his equipment, security guards hovering nearby. She nodded slightly. Mission accomplished, at least the first phase. Layla fell into step beside her as she headed toward the exit. Nathan's agreed to meet. With you, the younger woman said. It wasn't a question. Tomorrow morning, Margo confirmed. We've created enough doubt for him to listen. Ellie's already on damage control. She's telling guests that Julian doctored the photos, that he's being fired for unprofessional conduct. Let her scramble, Margo said. The cracks are forming. Now we need Nathan to see the full picture. Everything his wife and in-laws have been hiding from him. As they reached Margo's car, Layla asked the question that hung between them. Do you think he'll believe you? Choose you over them? Margo thought of the boy who had once trusted her implicitly, who had turned to her for truth and guidance. The man who had stood silent while his wife humiliated his mother. I don't need him to choose me, she said finally. I just need him to choose the truth. The rest will follow. Behind them, the perfect garden party continued, but beneath its manicured surface, something had fundamentally shifted. The first gambit had been played. The endgame was yet to come. Dawn mist hung over the lake, transforming the water into a silvery mirror that reflected the surrounding pines in ghostly silhouette. Margo sat on a weathered bench at the lakeside, Ezra's journal in her lap, his watch on her wrist. She'd arrived, early, needing time to center herself before confronting Nathan with the truth. This spot, this exact bench, was where Ezra had proposed to her 35 years ago. Where they'd brought baby Nathan for his first glimpse of the water. Where they'd scattered Ezra's ashes. The bench had been newer then, its wood golden rather than silver gray with age. Like her, like all of them. Footsteps sounded on the gravel, path behind her. She didn't turn, knowing who approached by the familiar cadence of his walk, so like his father's. Mom? Nathan's voice was hesitant as he came to stand beside the bench. Not sitting yet, still maintaining distance. Thank you for meeting me, she said, finally looking up at him. He looked tired, shadows beneath his eyes, his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. The polished financial executive replaced by a man who hadn't slept well. I told Sloan I had an early client meeting. Sit with me, Margo said, patting the bench beside her. Please. He hesitated, then settled beside her, his body tense. You said we needed to talk about Dad. Among other things. Margo ran her fingers over the journal's worn cover. Nathan, before I show you what I've found, I need you to answer one question honestly. Are you happy? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, the practiced response visible in his eyes, then closed it again. That's not a simple question. It should be, she said gently. Nathan stared out at the lake, the mask of professional composure slipping further. I have everything I'm supposed to want: career success, beautiful wife, social standing. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the shore. A bird called somewhere in the distance. No, he finally admitted, the word barely audible. I'm not happy. But I've made my choices, Mom. I've committed to this path. What if those choices weren't entirely yours? Margo asked. What if you were being manipulated long before you realized it? Nathan frowned. If this is about that photo from the wedding, it's much more than that. Margo opened the journal, finding the page she'd marked. This was your father's journal. Grace gave it to me last week. He was keeping it during the last months of his life. She handed it to him, watching as he recognized Ezra's handwriting. His fingers traced the words hesitantly, as if touching a ghost. Read the entry from April 10th, 2004, she instructed softly. Nathan found the page, his expression changing as he absorbed his father's words. His eyes widened at the references to the Whitakers, to their threats disguised as concern for his future. Dad was investigating the Whitakers? He asked, looking up at her in disbelief. Since 2003, when they proposed developing part of the school property where he taught. He discovered irregularities in their foundation, in their business practices. He believed they were using philanthropy as a cover for corruption. And he died before he could expose them, Nathan said slowly, the implication hanging in the air between them. 4 days after that entry, Margo confirmed, he was planning to confront Richard Whitaker the next day. Nathan shook his head, denial warring with dawning comprehension. That doesn't mean they had anything to do with his death. Dad had a heart condition. The doctor said, I'm not claiming they murdered him, Margo said carefully, at least not directly. But the stress of their threats, the burden he carried trying to protect us, it certainly contributed. She took the journal back, turning to another marked page. Listen to this. Nathan came home excited about a special summer program for high school students interested in finance. Invitation only, sponsored by Whitaker Financial. They're already making their move on him, laying groundwork for the future. She looked up, meeting her son's troubled gaze. That program changed the trajectory of your life, Nathan. It set you on the path to finance instead of teaching, which is what you'd always talked about. It led directly to your internship at Whitaker Financial after college, the one they offered as a tribute to your father's community service. How do you know about that? He asked sharply. Grace told me. She kept their offer letter. Margo reached into her purse and withdrew a folded paper, handing it to him. They were planning your recruitment since you were 15, Nathan. Your entire career has been orchestrated. He unfolded the letter, scanning the formal language, with increasing agitation. This doesn't prove anything. They recognized my potential, saw my interest in finance. An interest that appeared suddenly after their summer program, Margo pointed out. Before that, you wanted to teach history, like your father. Nathan stood abruptly, pacing along the shoreline. So what if they helped my career? I've built my own success since then. Have you? Margo asked quietly. Or have you been positioned where they needed you? A respected wealth manager with an impeccable reputation, perfectly placed to provide legitimacy to their operations. You make it sound like I'm some kind of pawn. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. What do you really know about Sloane's family business, Nathan? About their foundation? About the merger that your marriage was meant to secure? He turned to her, genuine shock on his face. How do you know about the merger? I overheard Sloane and Ellie discussing it the morning after your wedding. They spoke about your financial exposure being the reason the marriage was essential. Margo rose to join him at the water's edge. What does that mean, Nathan? What have they involved you in? He ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling. There are investment vehicles, Complex structures I developed for high-wealth clients. Sloane's family wanted access to them for the foundation's assets. Access or deniability. Margo. Pressed. Are they using your reputation to shield questionable transactions? Nathan's silence was answer enough. And the pills, Nathan? She asked gently. What Sloane puts in your drinks? What does she tell you they're for? His face flushed. With shame. She says they're just anti-anxiety medication. That I work too hard, get too tense. That they help me. Relax into our social obligations. But you don't remember taking them, Margo guessed. You just find yourself more compliant. More willing to go along with whatever they want. Nathan sat heavily on a large stone near the water, burying his face in his hands. I thought I was just stressed, having memory gaps from exhaustion, or drinking too much at events. Margo knelt before him, gently taking his hands in hers. Nathan, look at me. When he raised his head, she saw not the polished executive, not the dutiful husband, but her son, confused, hurting, lost. Your father tried to protect you from the Whitakers, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. He died before he could warn you fully. I failed to see what was happening as they pulled you into their orbit. But it's not too late to break free. What are you suggesting? He asked, his voice hollow. That I leave Sloane? Destroy my career? Everything I've built? I'm suggesting you reclaim your life, Margo said firmly. Starting with your mind. No more pills, no more manipulation. Clear-headed decisions about your future. Whatever you decide that should be. He laughed bitterly. You make it sound so simple. It won't be simple, she acknowledged. The Whitakers won't let you go. Easily. But you're not alone anymore, Nathan. I'm here. And there are others who understand what we're facing. Others? Who else is involved in this crusade of yours? Julian, the photographer who captured Sloane drugging you. Layla, who knows about Sloane's history of manipulation. Grace, who has kept records of the Whitakers' threats against our family. Margo squeezed his hands. And your father, through his journal, his investigation, the truth he tried to preserve. Nathan withdrew his hands, standing to pace again. You've been building quite the case. Because I love you, Margo said simply. Because I couldn't stand by and watch them erase who you really are. And who am I, Mom? He asked, genuine anguish in his voice. The son who stood silent, while his wife humiliated his mother? The finance expert who looked the other way while his in-laws used his reputation to cover corruption? The boy who abandoned his father's legacy for wealth and status? He shook his head. I don't even know anymore. You're Nathan Ezra Lively, Margo said, rising to face him directly. You're the boy who stood up for smaller kids on the playground. Who spent his allowance buying books for the school library? Who sat with your father for hours, listening to his stories about historical figures who changed the world through principle and courage? Her voice shook slightly, but she continued, reaching out to touch his face. You've lost your way, but you haven't lost yourself. Not completely. Not yet. Something broke in Nathan's expression, a wall crumbling after years of careful construction. I knew, Mom, he whispered, tears filling his eyes. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. About the Whitakers, about Sloane, about who I've become. But it was easier to ignore it, to accept the success, the status, to believe I deserved it all. It's not too late, Margo repeated softly. What would Dad think of me now? He asked, his voice small. Margo thought carefully before answering. He would think you were a man at a crossroads, and he would believe, absolutely, that you would make the right choice when it mattered most. Nathan took a deep, shuddering breath. I don't know if I can just walk away. There are complications, financial entanglements. The merger is nearly complete. Then we start smaller, Margo suggested. First, no more pills. Clear your head. Second, help us gather evidence of what they're really doing with the foundation money, with your investment vehicles. You're asking me to spy on my wife, my in-laws. I'm asking you to find the truth, Margo corrected. The truth your father died trying to expose. Nathan stared out at the lake, conflict evident in every line of his body. Finally, he turned back to her. I'll help, he said quietly, but carefully. If they suspect anything, we'll be careful, Margo promised. Julian and Layla are already gathering evidence. With your insider knowledge, we can finally understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. For the first time since their conversation began, Nathan's posture relaxed slightly. It feels strange, he admitted. Terrifying, but also like waking up after a long sleep. Margo smiled softly. That's exactly what it is. They sat together on the bench as the morning mist began to lift from the lake, the silence between them no longer strained but contemplative. There was damage between them still, wounds, that would take time to heal. But the foundation for reconciliation had been laid. I'm sorry, Mom, Nathan said finally, for letting Sloane treat you that way, for not standing up for you at the wedding. I know, Margo said, patting his hand. And I'm sorry, too, for not seeing what was happening to you sooner, for not protecting you the way Ezra would have wanted. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the water, mother and son sat shoulder to shoulder, united for the first time in years. The path ahead would be dangerous, the confrontation with the Whitakers inevitable. But they would face it together, with truth as their weapon and Ezra's memory as their shield. Margo glanced down at her husband's watch, ticking steadily on her wrist. Time, moving forward. Healing, beginning. Truth, emerging from shadows. The burden she had carried alone now shared, its weight already lighter. Margo's dining room table had become the unlikely headquarters of their quiet rebellion. For 2 weeks, it had accumulated the evidence of the Whitakers' deception. Financial records spread across its scarred wooden surface, photographs pinned, to a corkboard leaning against the wall, notebooks filled with careful observations and connections. Another late night? Julian asked, setting down a cardboard tray with 4 coffee cups as he entered through the kitchen door. The photographer had proven himself not just an ally, but a skilled investigator, his eye for detail extending beyond his camera. Nathan's, "Bringing the foundation board minutes tonight," Margo replied, barely looking up from the document she was studying, and Layla should be back from Hartford any minute. The dining room clock ticked softly in the background, a counterpoint to the rustle of papers and the soft hum of Julian's laptop. Outside, autumn rain tapped against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound around their work. This methodical gathering of evidence felt familiar to Margo, like her years as a research librarian, piecing together information from disparate sources to form a coherent whole. But the stakes now were infinitely higher, personal, familial. The back door opened again, admitting a rain-damp Layla, her expression triumphant despite her bedraggled appearance. "Got them," she announced, patting her messenger bag. Sloane's entire file from the ethics investigation at Radcliffe, the one that mysteriously disappeared from the official record. How? Julian asked, impressed. Professor Winters kept copies. Layla hung her wet coat on a hook by the door. She never believed Michael Garcia plagiarized that thesis. She's been waiting years for someone to reopen the case. Margo made space at the table, clearing a spot for Layla's documents. And these prove Sloane framed him? Better. Layla extracted a sealed envelope from her bag. They include Sloane's original complaint in her handwriting, with notes about how she obtained the plagiarized material, plus emails between her and a research assistant who helped her plant the evidence. She smiled grimly. She was careless back then, thought herself untouchable. Julian whistled low. College misconduct might seem small compared to financial fraud, but it establishes a pattern of behavior. And character, Margo added, which matters when we present our case. The front door opened, followed by the sound of an umbrella being shaken out in the entryway. Nathan appeared in the dining room doorway, his suit slightly rumpled after a full day at the office, his tie loosened, but his eyes clear. In the 2 weeks since their lakeside conversation, he had stopped accepting any drinks from Sloane, claiming a new health regimen. The difference in his demeanor was striking, sharper, more present, increasingly troubled by what he was discovering. "I've got something," he said without preamble, placing his briefcase on the table and extracting a flash. Drive. Internal emails between Ellie and the Whitaker Foundation board regarding the Meridian Holdings transfers. Julian immediately plugged the drive into his laptop. What exactly am I looking at? Evidence that the foundation has been channeling donations through a series of shell companies, Nathan explained, pointing to key sections as the documents appeared on screen. Money goes in as charitable contributions, gets moved to Meridian Holdings for investment, then disappears into offshore accounts before returning as capital gains that don't require the same reporting as the original donations. Money laundering, Layla said flatly. Technically tax avoidance, Nathan corrected, but walking a very thin legal line, and definitely contrary to what they tell donors about how their contributions are being used. Margo studied her son's face. Are you explicitly mentioned in any of these communications? Nathan's expression tightened. Yes. They refer to Nathan's special investment vehicles as the perfect cover for the Meridian transfers. Plausible deniability through my reputation. His voice turned bitter. They were using me as the respectable face for their financial shell game. And you had no idea? Julian asked carefully. I knew the structures I developed were being used aggressively, Nathan admitted. But I convinced myself it was all technically legal. I didn't look too closely at the specific implementation. He ran a hand through his hair. Willful ignorance, professional cowardice. You're making it right now, Margo said gently. That's what matters. Nathan nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. There's more. The Lakeside Medical Center that the foundation funds? It's been used for unauthorized pharmaceutical trials, experimental treatments that bypassed standard regulatory approval by being classified as wellness therapies. My God, Layla breathed. Are people being harmed? I don't have direct evidence of harm, Nathan said. But the absence of proper oversight creates serious risks, and the profits from these therapies flow back to Whitaker Pharmaceuticals, not the foundation or the medical center. Margo thought of Ezra's journal entries about the surgery center being a front for something bigger, and his discovery of pharmaceutical testing that wouldn't pass regulatory scrutiny. 20 years later, and the pattern continued. We're building a solid case, Julian observed. But we still don't have anything that directly ties Ellie to knowingly breaking the law. She could claim ignorance, blame underlings. That's where this comes in, Margo said quietly, reaching for a weathered envelope she had kept separate from the other documents. I found it hidden in the back of Ezra's journal. It was never sent. She withdrew a letter. The paper yellowed. With age, Ezra's handwriting instantly recognizable. It's dated April 23, 2004, the day before he died. A letter to Richard Whitaker that he never delivered. The room fell silent as Margo began to read. Richard, our meeting tomorrow isn't just about the school property development. I have compiled evidence of the foundation's misrepresentation to donors, environmental report falsification, and Ellie's direct orders to conceal soil contamination test results. I am prepared to submit this evidence to the appropriate authorities unless two conditions are met. First, you will cease all efforts to influence my son's future through your special programs. And second, you will ensure proper remediation of the contaminated soil before any construction begins. I take no pleasure in this confrontation, but I cannot remain silent while children's safety is compromised for profit. Margo looked up from the letter. He was ready to expose them. Completely. Not just for Nathan's sake, but for the community's protection. Nathan's face had gone pale. He died the next day, before the meeting could happen. No one stated the implication aloud. They didn't need to. "This letter is our ace," Julian said finally. "It directly ties Ellie to knowingly concealing environmental hazards. Combined with the foundation fraud, evidence, and the pharmaceutical trial documentation, it creates a devastating picture." "But how do we use it?" Layla asked. "If we go to authorities, the Whitakers will use their influence to bury the investigation. They've done it before." "We need a public forum," Margo said, "somewhere they can't control the narrative, with witnesses they can't silence or discredit." Nathan straightened in his chair, resolution hardening his features. "The Founders' Gala, this Saturday night." "The charity event?" Julian frowned. "It'll be crawling with Whitaker allies." "Exactly," Nathan countered. "Along with every major donor, 3 state politicians, and several national news outlets covering the Foundation's 20th anniversary. Ellie has been planning this showcase for months. It's their moment of maximum exposure and maximum vulnerability." "Nathan's right," Layla said, warming to the strategy. "Public revelation in front of their most important supporters and the press. They won't be able to silence everyone. And I'm scheduled to give remarks as the newest Whitaker family member," Nathan added, a short speech praising the Foundation's legacy. "Which you'll rewrite," Margo concluded, understanding blooming. "Completely." Nathan's smile held no humor. "But I'll need backup. Documentation to distribute. Witnesses ready to corroborate. And—" he hesitated. "Someone with the moral authority to make the truth undeniable." His eyes met Margo's across the table. "Me," she said quietly. "Ezra's widow. Nathan's mother. The burden they had to invite." "The woman they underestimated," Julian corrected. "Is this too dangerous?" Layla asked, concern evident in her voice. "The Whitakers have resources, connections. If we do this, there's no going back." "There's already no going back," Nathan said firmly. "Not for me. Not now that I know what they did to Dad, what they tried to make of me." Margo considered the risks carefully. The Whitakers would retaliate, legally, financially, perhaps worse. But silence had already cost too much. Ezra's silence, forced by threats. Her own silence, born of grief and confusion. Nathan's silence, manufactured through manipulation and ambition. "We move forward," she decided, but carefully. "Julian, can you prepare a digital presentation of the key evidence? Something concise but undeniable." "Already on it," he confirmed, fingers flying across his keyboard. "I'll have printouts. Ready for key attendees as well. Layla, you'll need to manage the media angle," Margo continued. "Make sure the right reporters are positioned to hear everything." "I have contacts at 3 networks," Layla affirmed, "and Professor Winters has agreed to come forward about the ethics case if needed." "And I'll rewrite my speech," Nathan said. "Plus prepare documentation of the financial structures for distribution to the Foundation board members." Margo nodded, a quiet sense of purpose filling her. "Then we have 3 days to finalize everything. 3 days until the gala." Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the kitchen window, Margo could see stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky. A good omen, perhaps, or simply the natural order reasserting itself. Light emerging after darkness, truth following deception. Later, after Julian and Layla had departed with their assignments, Margo found Nathan alone in the kitchen, staring at Ezra's letter. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked gently. "No." He didn't look up from the letter. "Just processing what it means. All these years I thought Dad died of natural causes. Now I have to consider that his confrontation with the Whitakers contributed, or even, we may never know with certainty, Margo said. But we can honor his courage by finishing what he started. Nathan nodded slowly. Tomorrow, I have to go home to Sloane. Pretend everything is normal. His expression tightened. Share a bed with someone who's been drugging me, using me. Just for 2 more nights, Margo reminded him. Then you never have to pretend again. What happens afterward, Mom? He asked, suddenly looking younger, vulnerable. After the gala, after the exposure, what's left of my life? My career will be collateral damage in all this. Margo placed her hand over his. What's left is freedom, Nathan. The chance to rebuild on truth rather than manipulation. To become who you were meant to be before the Whitakers interfered. And if that person is a disappointment? He asked quietly. If the real Nathan Lively isn't as impressive as the version they crafted? Then he'll be human, Margo said simply. Fallible, authentic, and infinitely more valuable than any facade. Nathan covered her hand with his, the connection between them strengthening after years of attenuation. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. That's what unconditional love means, Margo replied. It's not a prize for good behavior. It's a constant, regardless of circumstances. As she watched him leave for his last 2 nights in the Whitaker world, Margo felt a complex mixture of emotions: fear for the confrontation ahead, determination to see it through, sorrow for all the years lost to manipulation, and hope for what might emerge from the wreckage of exposure. She touched Ezra's watch on her wrist, drawing strength from its steady rhythm. We're almost there, she whispered, though whether to herself, to Ezra's memory, or to some larger sense of justice, she couldn't have said. The quiet rebellion that had begun in her heart the night of the wedding was about to burst into the open. The burden they had been forced to carry, silence, shame, manipulation, would soon be set down. And in its place, if they were brave, enough, if they were lucky enough, truth, reconciliation, a future built on honesty rather than illusion. Just 3 more days. The Whitaker Founders Gala transformed the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom into a temple of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over tables adorned with white orchids and gold accents. A string quartet played unobtrusively in the corner. Waitstaff in tailored uniforms circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres, while a massive banner behind the stage proclaimed 20 years of transforming communities beneath the II Whitaker Foundation logo. Margo adjusted the simple strand of pearls at her throat, Ezra's gift, her talisman. The elegant black dress she wore had been Julian's suggestion, its understated sophistication a stark contrast to the ostentatious displays surrounding her. Are you ready? Julian appeared at her elbow, camera in hand, though tonight he was not the official photographer. That role belonged to a Whitaker-approved professional whose lens would capture only the narrative Ellie wished to project. As ready as I'll ever be, Margo replied, surveying the room. Layla was near the press table, engaged in animated conversation with reporters from 3 different networks. Nathan stood with Sloane near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced smiles, though Margo noted the careful distance he maintained from his wife, the way he avoided accepting drinks from her hand. The presentation is loaded and tested, Julian confirmed quietly. I have the backup drive if anything goes wrong with the main system, and the folders are placed at each board member's seat. Margo nodded, her pulse quickening despite her outward calm. Everything was in place. The truth, so long buried, was about to emerge. She only hoped the cost wouldn't be too high, for Nathan, for all of them. Across the room, Ellie Whitaker held court, resplendent in midnight blue silk, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. The power she exuded was almost palpable, her confidence absolute. This was her domain, her triumph, her legacy. But not for much longer. Dinner proceeded with orchestrated precision. 5 courses of elegant cuisine, paired wines, polite conversation about charitable initiatives and community impact. At Margot's table, far from the center of power, Julian kept up a stream of pleasant small talk while surreptitiously observing the room. Between the main course and dessert, Richard Whittaker rose for the evening's first speech, his patrician voice carrying easily through the ballroom. 20 years ago, when Ellie suggested we formalize our community giving into a foundation, I couldn't have imagined the impact we would have. His words flowed with practiced sincerity, extolling the foundation's accomplishments, the lives ostensibly improved, the communities transformed. Margo listened with quiet attention, noting the kernels of truth buried within the carefully constructed narrative. The foundation had built facilities, funded programs, presented oversized checks at photo opportunities. The deception lay not in what was said, but in what remained hidden: the financial shell games, the regulatory evasions, the self-enrichment disguised as philanthropy. After Richard's speech came a slickly produced video highlighting the foundation's projects, complete with testimonials from grateful recipients. Margo caught Julian's eye as a segment featured the Lakeside Medical Center, the facility Nathan had identified as conducting unauthorized pharmaceutical trials. The contrast between glossy image and hidden reality was stark. Finally, it was time for the next generation remarks. Ellie introduced Nathan and Sloane with evident pride, her smile calculated to project dynastic continuity. The future of the Whittaker Foundation is in excellent hands with my daughter and her brilliant husband. Nathan approached the podium, the sealed manila envelopes Julian had prepared clutched in one hand, his rewritten speech in the other. He looked momentarily nervous, then found Margot's gaze across the room. Something in his expression settled, strengthened. "Thank you, Ellie," he began, his voice clear and steady. "When I was asked to speak tonight about the Foundation's legacy, I spent considerable time reflecting on what that word truly means, what we pass on to future generations, what endures beyond wealth or buildings or even charitable programs." He paused, looking directly at Margo. "My father taught me that a person's true legacy is their commitment to truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable, even when it comes at personal cost." A slight murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the expected celebratory tone. In preparing for tonight, I discovered some truths about the Whittaker Foundation that I feel compelled to share. "Nathan," Sloane interrupted smoothly, appearing at his side and placing a hand on his arm. "Perhaps we should move on to the donor recognition portion of the evening." Her smile was fixed, her eyes cold with warning. Nathan gently but firmly removed her hand. "No, Sloane. It's time for honesty." He gestured to Julian, who activated the presentation. Behind Nathan, the screen changed from the Foundation logo to a carefully organized display of financial records, transfers between the Foundation and shell companies, offshore accounts, discrepancies between public claims and actual expenditures. Gasps and murmurs grew louder. Ellie rose halfway from her seat, her composure slipping for the first time as she signaled frantically to the audio-visual technician. But Julian had secured the system. The presentation continued. "For years," Nathan continued, "the Foundation has operated a sophisticated network of financial misdirection, using charitable contributions for private gain while evading regulatory oversight. I know this because my own investment structures were utilized in this scheme, a fact I became aware of only recently, but one for which I accept full responsibility." Sloane was no longer at his side. She had retreated to the family table, where she and Ellie conferred in urgent, angry whispers. Richard Whittaker's face had gone slack with shock. "But the financial impropriety is only part of the story," Nathan said, his voice gaining strength. "There are human costs to this deception that can't be calculated on a balance sheet." He looked toward Margo again, and this time nodded slightly. "Her cue." Margo rose from her seat, heart pounding but steps steady as she made her way to the podium. Nathan placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, a public declaration of solidarity that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Before stepping aside, she faced the crowd of influential strangers, powerful figures who had never seen her as anything but peripheral, if they'd noticed her at all. The librarian, the widow, the burden they had to invite. "My name is Margo Lively," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "My late husband, Ezra, was a teacher who discovered something troubling about the Whitaker Foundation 20 years ago during the development of what is now Lakeside Commons." Julian advanced the presentation to show Ezra's photograph, his kind, serious face looking out at the assembled crowd, alongside scans of his journal entries and the letter he'd written the day before his death. Ezra found evidence that the foundation had concealed soil contamination reports during the development process, putting children and families at risk. When he prepared to bring this evidence to light, he received threats targeting our son's future. Margo's voice remained steady, though emotion tightened her throat. The day before he planned to confront Richard Whitaker with this evidence, Ezra died of a heart attack. A stunned silence had fallen over the ballroom. Even the waitstaff had stopped circulating, frozen in place by the unfolding drama. "I cannot prove that the stress of these threats contributed to his death," Margo continued, "but I can prove that the pattern of deception he identified has continued for 2 decades. She gestured to the screen, where Julian was now showing documentation of the pharmaceutical trials, the Radcliffe Ethics Committee evidence, the Foundation's misrepresentations to donors. The Whitaker Foundation presents itself as a force for community good, while systematically enriching its founders, evading taxes, and in some cases, endangering public health. The charitable work you've seen tonight is real, but it represents a fraction of the Foundation's actual activities." From the corner of her eye, Margo saw Ellie moving now, attempting to reach the stage. Security personnel, briefed in advance by Layla, respectfully but firmly intercepted her. "This is outrageous," Ellie's voice cut through the room. "These are baseless accusations from a woman with a personal vendetta. She's clearly unstable." "The evidence speaks for itself, Ellie," Nathan interrupted, returning to Margo's side. "Every document shown tonight has been verified. Copies have been provided to the Foundation Board, the State Attorney General's office, and selected members of the press." He turned to address the increasingly agitated crowd directly. "As the newest member of the Whitaker family, I could have remained silent, continued to benefit from this deception. Instead, I choose to stand with my mother, with the truth, and with my father's memory." Sloane's cold laugh cut through the growing commotion. "Your mother?" she mocked, moving toward the stage. "The burden we had to invite. The woman you were so eager to distance yourself from when it served your ambitions." "Yes," Nathan acknowledged, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. I was a coward. I valued status and wealth over integrity and family." He looked at Margo with naked remorse. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." Chaos was erupting across the ballroom. Board members huddled over the documents Julian had placed at their seats. Donors confronted Richard Whitaker, demanding explanations. Reporters were already on their phones, calling in the breaking story. Ellie, finally evading security, stormed toward the stage. "How dare you?" she hissed at Margo, her carefully constructed dignity shattered. "You have no idea what forces you're interfering with, what connections we have. This little exposé will cost you everything." Margo met her gaze directly. "I lost everything that mattered when Ezra died, and nearly lost my son to your family's influence. There's nothing more you can take from me, Ellie." "You stupid, ordinary woman," Ellie spat. "Do you think anyone will believe you over us? We'll bury these accusations. We'll bury you." "Too late," Julian said from nearby, his phone held up. "Live streaming to 3 networks. Your threats were just broadcast to the entire Northeast." Ellie's face drained of color. She looked wildly around the room, taking in the collapsed facade of her carefully constructed world. Donors were already leaving. Board members were demanding Richard's immediate resignation, and reporters were capturing every moment of the implosion. Sloane appeared beside her mother, her beautiful features twisted with rage. "This marriage is over," she snarled at Nathan. "You've destroyed everything." "No," he replied calmly. "I've simply stopped helping you maintain the illusion." With a final venomous glare at Margo, Sloane grabbed her mother's arm and pulled her toward the exit. Ellie went, her proud posture crumpled, her dynasty collapsing around her. Richard followed shortly after, pursued by irate board members and abandoned by the political figures who had so eagerly associated with the Whittaker name just hours before. In the aftermath, as the ballroom emptied and security began gently ushering out the remaining guests, Margo, Nathan, Julian, and Layla stood together in a quiet island amid the chaos they had unleashed. "It's done," Layla said softly, "for better or worse." "There will be consequences," Julian warned. "Legal challenges, certainly, possibly worse." "We knew that coming in," Nathan replied. "It was still the right thing to do." Margo touched Ezra's watch on her wrist, feeling a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in 20 years. "He would be proud of you," she told Nathan, "of the choice you made tonight." Nathan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I hope so, Mom. I really hope so." As they walked out of the hotel together, reporters called questions from behind hastily established police barriers. Cameras flashed. Tomorrow, the story would dominate headlines. The spectacular collapse of a philanthropic empire. The exposure of decades of deception. But in this moment, walking beside her son under the clear autumn sky, Margo felt only a profound sense of rightness, of balance restored. The burden she had carried, of silence, of exclusion, of knowing her husband's concerns had gone unaddressed, had finally been set down. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with truth as their foundation. A month after the gala, the first snow of winter dusted the shoreline of the lake with crystalline white. Margo sat on the weathered bench, her bench, Ezra's bench, watching her breath form clouds in the crisp morning air. The water had darkened to deep slate, reflecting the pewter sky above. Perfect stillness surrounded her, broken only by the occasional call of a winter bird or the soft crunch of ice beneath the paws of a wandering deer. In the weeks since the Whittaker Foundation's collapse, life had transformed with dizzying speed. The story had dominated news cycles for days: financial impropriety, pharmaceutical testing irregularities, environmental cover-ups spanning 2 decades. The Attorney General's investigation was ongoing, with indictments expected soon for Richard and Ellie. Sloane had fled to Europe, her carefully curated social media presence gone dark. And Nathan. Nathan had weathered the storm with a strength that surprised even Margo. He had resigned from his position, cooperated fully with investigators, faced the consequences of his unwitting complicity. The divorce proceedings had begun. His professional reputation had suffered, certainly, but his forthright honesty had earned him unexpected allies. Margo unfolded the paper she'd been holding, not Ezra's journal or his unsent letter to Richard Whittaker, but something she had found afterward, tucked inside one of his old books, a letter addressed to her, dated April 20th, 2004, 4 days before his death. She had read it countless times in the past month, finding new meaning with each reading. The sound of footsteps on the path drew her attention. Nathan approached, tall and lean in his dark coat, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. Without the Whittaker influence, without Sloane's controlling presence, he looked younger somehow. More like the boy she remembered, the one who had Ezra's thoughtful eyes and quiet determination. "Sorry I'm late," he said, joining her on the bench and offering one of the cups. the lawyer called as I was leaving. More complications? She asked, accepting the warmth gratefully. No, actually. Good news for once. A small smile touched his lips. Since I was unaware of the Foundation's activities and came forward voluntarily, they're not pursuing charges against me. I'll have to testify, but as a witness, not a defendant. That is good news. Margo studied his face, tired but peaceful, the haunted look that had shadowed him for years finally absent. How does it feel? Nathan considered the question, gazing out at the lake. Lighter, he said finally. Like I've been carrying something I didn't even recognize as weight until it was gone. He sipped his coffee. What about you? Any regrets about the storm we unleashed? None, Margo replied simply. Though I do think about the legitimate charitable work that will be disrupted. The Foundation did do some good, despite everything. Else. Julian and Layla are working on that, Nathan reminded her. Their new transparency initiative for charitable organizations, using what happened with the Whitakers as a case study. Margo nodded, smiling slightly. Julian and Layla had formed an unexpected alliance that extended beyond their investigation of the Whitakers. Two people from different worlds, united by a commitment to truth and accountability. A chosen family of sorts, forming in the aftermath of exposure. I found something, she said after a comfortable silence. A letter from your father. Not the one to Richard Whitaker, but one he wrote to me, just before he died. I thought you might want to hear it. Nathan's expression softened. I'd like that very much. Margo unfolded the paper carefully, clearing her throat. My dearest Margo, if you're reading this, it means I've found the courage to tell you everything about the Whitakers and the danger I believe they pose to our community. And, more personally, to Nathan's future. Or perhaps it means I've lost the chance to do so, in which case, forgive me for the burden this knowledge will place on you. I've been investigating irregularities in the Whitaker Foundation for over a year. What began as concern over a school development project has revealed a pattern of deception that stretches back to the Foundation's inception. Richard and Ellie have built their reputation on charitable works, while systematically exploiting the very communities they claim to serve. More troubling still is their interest in Nathan. It's not coincidental, their sudden attention to our son's academic future. They seek to cultivate him, to shape him into an asset. I've tried to shield him without frightening him, but I fear my protection won't be enough. Whatever happens in the days ahead, remember that truth matters more than comfort, integrity more than success. These are the values we've tried to instill in Nathan, and they will guide him back if he ever loses his way. My love for you has been the constant star of my life, Margo. My only regret is if I've failed to show you the depth of that love in my actions. You are stronger than you know, wiser than you claim, and more beloved than I could ever express. All my heart, Ezra. Margo's voice trembled slightly on the final words. The lake before them remained still, a witness to their shared grief and tentative healing. He knew, Nathan said softly. He saw what they were doing long before anyone else. He tried to protect you, Margo agreed. And when he couldn't, he left the truth for us to find when we were ready. Nathan brushed away a tear. All those years, I thought I was building a life he would have been proud of. Success, status, marrying into an influential family. But I was just fulfilling their plan for me, becoming their asset. You broke free, Margo reminded him gently. When it mattered most, you chose truth. They sat quietly, watching a pair of winter ducks glide across the water's surface, leaving silvery trails in their wake. The snow was falling again, delicate flakes drifting down to melt on their shoulders. What will you do now? Margo asked eventually. Nathan smiled, a real smile reaching his eyes. I'm thinking about teaching. History, like Dad. There's a community college with an opening for spring semester. Ezra would have loved that, Margo said, her heart full. What about you, Mom? She considered the question, watching the snow accumulate on the bench beside her. I'm going back to the library. Not as head librarian, that ship has sailed, but they need help with the local history archives. She touched Ezra's watch, on her wrist. It seems appropriate somehow, preserving the truth of this place, this community. And us? Nathan asked, vulnerability in his voice. Where do we go from here? Forward, Margo said simply. Together, but separately too. Building something new from what we've learned. She reached for his hand. You don't need to make up for the past, Nathan. Just be present in what comes next. He squeezed her fingers, nodding slowly. I'd like that. As the morning progressed, they talked of practical matters, Nathan's apartment hunting, the ongoing legal processes, Grace's offer to help with Nathan's transition. Ordinary concerns, discussed openly without the shadow of secrets or manipulation between them. Eventually, Nathan checked his watch. I should go. I'm meeting with the college dean at noon. He hesitated. Will you be okay here alone? I'm exactly where I need to be, Margo assured him. After he left, Margo remained on the bench, watching the snow transform the landscape into something pristine and new. From her bag, she withdrew a journal, not Ezra's, but her own. A gift from Julian and Layla, its leather cover embossed with a simple tree of life. She opened to the first blank page and began to write. Today, Nathan and I sat by the lake where Ezra proposed to me 35 years ago. We read Ezra's letter together and talked about the future, his teaching plans, my return to the library, the slow rebuilding of trust between us. Not as mother and son trapped in old patterns, but as two people finding their way forward. The Whitakers' world has collapsed around them, but I take no joy in their downfall. Only relief that the truth has emerged, that Nathan has broken free, of their influence, that Ezra's concerns have finally been validated. I came to this bench a month ago burdened by the past, by grief, by alienation, by the wound of being dismissed as the burden they had to invite. I leave it today carrying something different, not certainty or triumph, but peace. The quiet knowledge that some burdens are meant to be set down, while others, love, memory, truth, we carry willingly, for they shape us into who we are meant to be. Thank you, Ezra, for the courage to face difficult truths. Thank you, Nathan, for finding your way back, and thank you to myself for refusing to accept the role they tried to assign me, for becoming not the burden, but the reckoning. Margo closed the journal, tucking it carefully back into her bag. The snow was falling more heavily now, erasing footprints, covering the bench in a soft white blanket. Soon, her own presence here would be obscured, the only evidence of her visit a slight depression in the gathering drifts. But that was as it should be. The lake remained. The truth remained. The future, with all its uncertainty and possibility, remained. She stood, brushing snow from her coat, and began the walk back to her car. Not victorious, not defeated, but whole. Carrying only what needed to be carried, leaving behind what deserved to be left. The burden, finally, was hers to define. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.